Without further ado, we're going to roll into our keynote. I want to get a chance. So in the chat box, we are going to go ahead and make sure that we're introducing, in the chat box, you're going to get a chance to talk. You're going to need a pad. You can use your notebook if you have your package, a pen to be able to jot some things down. Our opening session keynote is Dr. Gale Gorke. If one of her presentations, either online or in person at a conference, you're missing out, but that is why we brought her virtually here to Alaska. This is our chance really to just, I love that, fantastic moonwalk, Dr. Gale. She is just a dynamic, charismatic leader inside of the out-of-school time field with a lot of credentialing behind her name and experience to boot. So just want to give a huge warm welcome to Dr. Gale. We're going to turn it over to her for her presentation today. Again, put your questions and comments in the chat box. We are going to have a chance at the end. We'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So we will turn it over to Dr. Gale.
I'm just trying to get, can y'all see my speaker stuff? Will y'all give me thumbs up? Okay, cool. And did it just move? Okay, good. All right. So before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the amazing opportunity that you've given me to make sure that I don't honor you guys that are living and serving in the sacred land that is Alaska. And so thank you so much for what you do. And I did want to touch base just a second because it's interesting. I'm currently in Missouri working with the Missouri After School Network, and they're talking about the history of how they came into after school and how important after school is, which is where you guys are. And, during COVID, absolutely. But, after school has a 150-year history in this country. When our men went to war and our women went to work, the YMCA had a place for kids to go. And so we've been doing this a long, long time. And the other thing that I think was so profound in my own journey over the last week, thinking about what I want to talk to them about tomorrow, was that during No Child Left Behind, when math and language take the test, and all kids are going to be on the same page on the same day, doing it the same way, and there were pacing guides, and everybody was paddling with Madeline Hunter and doing direct instruction. After school was the place where the knowledge became practice, where the cool activities were. So for that whole time, when schools restricted some of those cool things because they didn't have the time to do that, the after school was the one that made up the difference. And, now the big push is, social emotional learning. Guys, that we've been doing that forever. It's like now they've given it a name and made it a big, social emotional learning. Guys, that's what we do. What we do is we love these kids, and because we love them, they grow up to be healthy and happy and safe and all of the things that you do. So big thank you from my heart, because you guys know this is what I love, and I'm so grateful that I get to make a living hanging out with some of the most remarkable individuals in the world. So thank you for who you are in the lives of these kids, and in the wonderful place that is Alaska. So I want to talk to you a little bit about my journey with COVID, because I think all of us have been changed in ways that are going to be for the rest of our lives. And I wish there was a way to go back. I don't think there is. I think this is something that we're going to encounter, and hopefully not again in our lifetime, but to be prepared for that, some of the skills we're learning, some of the thoughts we've had to change, and attitudes and ideas and things that are a part of all of what this is. And what I did for a living was I stood in front of rooms of hundreds and sometimes thousands of people and talked. And so March 2020, all my work went poof. I was like, oh, no conference, no training, sorry, and an organization called Beyond, the conference is Beyond School Hours, but it's the foundation's organization, said, hey, listen, can you help us go virtual? And I said, of course, and had no idea how to do that. And neither did you guys. And we all went on this steep learning curve of how do we take what we do with what we've got. And, this idea that in after school, if you're not flexible, you get broken. And if anybody's flexible, man, we are like the Gumby people. Okay. Yeah, we can do that. We'll figure out a way. And that attitude is so important in this. And then I was thinking about the importance of the role of public education and how important it is that we exhibit the kind of examples if we're going to be the leaders in programs that are going to try to get our kids to grow up to be healthy, happy, but also civil, then we're going to need to take a look at where does that compass come from? How do we decide what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is false? And so I went on this journey, and that's what this is. This is the journey of that. So the first place my journey started was I was binge watching Disney, y'all. Anybody else? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. And I got to watch Frozen 2 because I hadn't watched it. You know, I did the other Let It Go, Let It. Yeah, I did that one, but I didn't do this one. And there's a point in the film where the two ladies are like, we don't know what the future holds for us. It's cloudy. We don't know what direction to go. And they're talking to the troll guy, right? The old sage troll guy. That's kind of the wise guy. And so they're talking to him and they're like, we don't know what to do. And he goes, when the future is cloudy and you don't know what to do, the only thing you can do is the next right thing. And I thought, ooh, that's cool. And it kind of got me thinking about how do we know what the next right thing is? And you know, I don't know about you guys, but my future looked pretty cloudy in 2020. And I was like, I don't know what to do. So what do I need to do? Well, making sure that that choice I make is going to be the right thing. So I began having conversations with my friends. And okay, so my world is weird. I don't know about yours. It's a nice weird, but like I'm in Missouri, and we're talking about, you know, the history of after school, people's journeys and all of that. Well, we go to a restaurant yesterday, and the gal who's our waitress, who wasn't supposed to be our waitress, but ended up being our waitress, one of those things. She goes, oh yeah, I worked in after school. And it was like, guys, the reach we have. Some of you have done this for a lifetime. Some of us, this is your first day. Some of you, you know, you're going to do it for several years and earn money while you go to school and then go off and be brilliant. Some of you, you're going to do this forever. This is your career. And the way that after school has touched all of us. And so when I start thinking about things and asking questions of things, these little things show up in my life. You know, I have a conversation, I watch a film, I read something on the internet, I get a text. I don't know. It all just keeps showing. So here was the first thing, was this Frozen thing. I was talking to a friend of mine, and she goes, well, you know what Margaret Mead said. I go, Margaret Mead, the anthropologist? She goes, yeah. She goes, she was asked one time, how do you know that a society has become civilized? How do you know that a society has become, you know, good to their people? And I said, and she said that, well, because that was easy, because they found skeletons where the femur bone had been broken and had healed. And people are like, okay, wait, how does a broken bone tell you that the society is civilized? She goes, in the wild, if you break your leg, that's it. You can't run, you can't hunt, you can't move yourself to safety. You're done for. And so when they found skeletons where it was obvious somebody had suffered one of these life-changing events, they had broken their leg, the leg had healed, and they had lived beyond and through that, through recovery, then that meant somebody in that society had taken care of them. And you knew the society was civilized when it took care of its sick and injured, when it was there to support those that needed the support. And I thought, oh, that's cool. So then I started looking at the role of public school. Now, if you go back to the founding fathers and you look at why public school has been dedicated to the states, why do we educate everyone? Guys, there's country in the world to this day that don't educate everyone. They don't want you reading. Pablo Freire says you learn to read, you can cause a revolution. Okay. There are certain countries, depending on your gender or your socioeconomics, whatever, you don't get an education. In this country, getting an education is one of the most important things that we need. The first reason is because of literacy. Our system is designed around people being able to read, not just doing what people have told them, but being able to research, formulate an opinion, and come out on the other side of that being literate about what they've decided. So number one is, if you can't read, you can't vote well. And so literacy is huge in this country, right? And the second thing, now this is in ed code. Okay, not in standards and core and curriculum and all of that other stuff, but in the ed code of our states, the law of our states, the second most important reason we have public education is ethics. And there's a difference between ethics and religion. Although some people, their faith gives them their ethics. I understand that. We're going to talk about that and touch on that because that's an important thing to acknowledge. But the fact that we are ethical, that we do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, that we obey our laws, that we treat each other well, that we respect things. It's one of the most important things about the indigenous people there in Alaska and the land and the being tied to the land. That's a huge ethical thing in your guys's world, and honoring that and respecting that and calling attention to that. That's an ethical thing, right? And so there's always this separation of church and state. I'm not talking religion. I'm talking doing the right thing because it's the right thing, the ethical thing to do. And so how do you fit into this? How do we decide what is right and wrong in our worlds? How do we decide how we're going to be respectful of others? And so one of the ways that I can tell what's important to you is if you love it, you give it your time. Okay. I can tell what you love by the amount of time you put in. And when you're doing something you love, time flies, right? You're doing something you love, and all of a sudden you're like, dang, look where the time went. It does get into it, and all of a sudden it just goes past that. And so this idea that where we put our heart and soul and our passion and our time, those are the two places that we're going to see what matters to us. And the other thing is this: you got to have integrity. Now, let me talk to you about integrity. Okay. All right. Put your right hand up and put a big letter A on the palm of your hand. I want you to write it on the palm of your hand. Big letter A. Okay. And say A stands for actions. Okay. A stands for actions. Got that? Now take your left hand, put a big letter B on the palm of your left hand and say B stands for beliefs. B stands for beliefs. So if A stands for actions and B stands for beliefs, you have integrity when those two things come together. When what you say and what you do, same thing. Does that make sense to you? You can't say one thing and do something else because people are like, yeah, I believe it when I see it, right? So how do we have integrity? We have our actions and our beliefs are going to meet, okay? And the other thing I want you to consider is this. Whatever you do, you have to do it without malice. Whatever it is, whatever choice you're meaning, do you mean to do good? And this comes from this story that I heard years ago. And it was about a little boy, and he's wandering through the woods, and he has a bow and arrow. And he keeps notching these bows or arrows and notching them into his bow and sending them off. And he is missing everything. He is the worst shot in the history of man. Can't hit the broadside of a barn. All of that, right? And as he's doing this, a beautiful white dove that belongs to the queen comes flying through, and he takes an arrow, puts it in his bow, and he sends it up into the air, and he strikes and he kills this dove. And within just seconds, the guards in the forest have come, they've grabbed him, and they're carrying him off to the queen. And the whole way there, he's saying, but I didn't mean to, but I didn't mean to, but I didn't mean to. And they put him in front of the queen's throne, and the queen says one thing to him: did you mean to do good? You see, the problem wasn't that he struck the bow with the arrow, or the dove with the arrow. The problem was that he was shooting a bow and arrow at it in the first place. The idea that, did you mean to do good? You know, there's a proverb that says, like the madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death is he who deceives his neighbor and says, I was only joking. Kidding, just kidding. The idea that those things that we say, those things that we do they come from a place of, did we mean to do good? Because if you mean to do good, you will. And so I want you to consider that. Now, in order to be someone that people can trust, there's 4 elements of trust. The first is you got to be reliable. That means that if you say you're going to do it, they can trust that you're going to be there and you're going to do what you say. Okay, that's being reliable. Okay, 2, you're going to be accepting. Humans are exceedingly diverse. Okay, and it's not just race and gender and religion. It is that, but it's also multiple intelligences and learning styles and personality and temperament and all these things. And so being open and accepting of that and recognizing this is who you are, and we're going to start with that. And as we move toward growth together, some things might change, some things might not, but I'm going to look at you, I'm going to be accepting of you, and I'm going to be caring of that and understanding of that and respectful of that. I'm going to be open. There was a couple of studies done because of the polarity that is our country right now. And it was really cool to notice. I love that Thomas, you made that comment about how there was this wonderful bipartisan across the board, how important after school is to people in Alaska, regardless of whatever political leaning. The study is called America in One Room, and it was done in Stanford. And they took 579 people that were very polar in their political belief systems. Okay, very polar, threw them together for a weekend and wanted to see if they could come up with solutions that would be more positive. And the truth is, the more polar they were, the better the solutions were, as long as they had one other characteristic. One, they were passionate about what they believed, very polarized. Okay. But the second characteristic was that they were willing. They were willing to hear the other side, to look at the problem, to listen to suggestions, and to find a solution that would be collaborative for both. This combination of passion and willingness is the huge difference in organizations that can come to a consensus and find a solution that is collaborative. Okay. And you've got to be open to hearing that other side. You don't necessarily have to agree with it. You might not understand it, but to be open and willing to hear it is huge. And then the last part of it is the willingness to speak truth, to be straightforward, to be someone that says, okay, but this is what we know to be true. It's the beauty of data. It's the beauty of the wonderful things that you guys have, where you can take what somebody believes and you can show them, okay, I know you believe this, but here's what the data says, and perhaps change that perspective. So the idea that we're willing to speak the truth in love, we're willing to put the truth out there and talk about what is true. So when we talk about morality, we talk about people that do the right thing. A moral person is someone that knows the difference between right and wrong and chooses the right thing. Okay. An immoral person would be somebody that knows the difference between right and wrong, but they're going to choose to do something that would be considered wrong. The dilemma that we face today is so many of our children are amoral, which means they don't always know what's right from wrong. And when you look at the kind of just the weird stuff that's they're exposed to, like reality TV shows, okay, they're not real, right? Those people are not, they get paid to do this. If you acted like they did, you would not keep your job, okay? They're all bilingual. They all speak English and cussing, and they don't have any positive relationships with anybody, and they have all of the stuff like that. And our kids are looking at that going, well, if that's real, and if that's how, that's, and so this idea that sometimes the line between what is right and what is wrong is sometimes very blurred, and they simply don't know the difference. And so part of our job in public education is to teach kids to be ethical, to show them what our society says are the norms that we want to follow, what is the right choice to make. Okay. And so that's part of our role here. Now, one of my favorite guys that I learned to write curriculum with is a guy, Dr. Roger Taylor, and he he was a social studies teacher, and he said, if you want to know anything about any society, regardless of the year that it was involved or the cultures they had, all of that, all you need to know is the ahas. You're going to analyze their human activities. Now, you notice number 9 is already up there because that's where we're headed. Number 1. All societies produce, exchange, and distribute their goods. And they do that based on what's available to them and how they can get it from one place to another. Transportation. Y'all have some very unique modes of transportation in Alaska, right? Dog sleds, right? Mush, chi, ha, all that stuff. If you wouldn't, there's very few places in the world that are going to do that, but you guys need to, because that's what works for you, right? All societies have ways that they communicate, and it might be technologically, it might be smoke signals, it might be marks on trees, and all of the different ways that somebody knows what's happening next, and they share the information with each other. And depending on where the development of that culture is, they're going to protect and conserve that culture. They're going to want to keep the things that are valuable to them, and they're going to want to put them in a place where they last. Okay, they're going to educate. All societies are going to teach people stuff that they think is important. Okay, they're going to use technology and tools. When you think about the difference between when they were wanderers and then they became hunters and gatherers, and then they became farmers, and what happened to war when gunpowder was discovered, and all of those different kinds of things. Today, look at how the technology has impacted our lives. For a long time before COVID, we're like, turn off this, turn off that. Most people's life is this 6-inch screen. You know, like the number one problem in the country right now is pedestrian versus car, because they're too busy looking here and walking out into the street, right? And we were like, you know, turn off the screen time, screen time, screen time. And now we're like, oh, please, can we have some screen time? Because we wanted to stay connected. So how do we use technology in a right way and benefit from it? All societies play. All of them have games. I am a firm believer. You want to know a culture? Sing their songs, eat their food, wear their clothing, dance their dances, play their games. Okay. That's how you learn how that society works. They all have some way that they govern themselves and organize themselves and how they distribute power in their place. And then they have some kind of ethical, spiritual, moral behavior that is appropriate. The last thing they do is they do things for beauty. And that's the art and the music and all of those other things that are a part of that. So if you want to know any culture, if you look at it through these 10 lenses, you're going to get a really good idea about what it looks like. And you cannot deny that this is a part of all of our cultures and all of our societies, that there is an ethical piece to that. Okay. When I taught public school, you don't teach religion. Now, sometimes they'll do history of religions and they'll have a course on that. But I would have a classroom, you know, the district I taught in had 27 languages represented. It had multiple faiths represented. And so I wanted everyone in my room to feel like there was a place where we could come together and say, yes, but we do believe this. This is something we do believe as a universal truth. This is an ethical way to behave. And one of the best resources I've ever found for this is this book called Oneness, written by a guy named, check it out, Jeffrey Moses. Okay. To me, that's hilarious. This guy wrote this book. Now, why is this so important? He has gone into every major faith. Okay. Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Shintoism, Muslimism, all of the isms, all of them. He's gone into all of them. And he said, where do we find in their writings, in the Quran, in the Torah, in the writings of Confucius, where do we find these things that all of the faiths say? Okay. Give you an example. Treat others the way you want to be treated. The golden rule, we call it, right? Confucius said it 500 years before Jesus did. Virtually every faith that there is, somewhere in that faith, they say, if you want to know how to treat others, treat them the way you want to be treated. Okay. And the beauty of this book is it's done all the research for you. And it gives you a list of universal truths, places where you can come together and you can coexist, where I can honor the thing in you that gives you your moral compass. For many of you, your faith is what's most important to you. And to try to say that that doesn't matter and that doesn't belong in school takes a piece of you away. And what we need to do is be able to take what that is, where our faith is, what we believe, and put it into a context that we can find a place to coexist, that we can become one in our thoughts, in the ways that we want to treat each other, the culture we want to have, the society that is civil. And so this is a great resource for that if you don't have one of those. The other place I went, and you're going to get several what I call a care package at the end of this, where you're going to get my research and all the handouts, and you're going to copy of my PDF of my PowerPoint, all of that. So if you're like trying to, fervently take notes, don't panic, Shabanic, it's coming. Okay. I'm going to give it to you. All right. Now, one of the things I did is I went back to the moral development theories of all of the guys. And I went back and I looked at almost all of the major theorists. Okay. And most of them believe that moral development happens in stages. Okay. Erikson had 8 stages. Piaget's got 4 stages. Gilligan, who took Kohlberg's work, she just took gender and added it to that. Some people were more behavioral. If you look at Skinner or you look at Pavlov, ring the bell and the dog salivates, that whole thing. All of these different things, they said that our belief systems they come from this gets shaped over time with us. Okay. And so I'm going to give you an overview of all of the major theorists about what they thought about moral development. And there's 2 that I'm going to focus on a little more specifically for you. One is this dude Maslow. Now, you probably know Maslow if you've taken any psychology class in any college thing. Maslow basically thought there were a series of stages that you go through. The first one is you got to have your basic needs met. Okay. The second part is you're going to need to feel safe. Then you're going to need to feel that you're loved and belong. so that somebody loves you before you love yourself, because that's where self-worth comes. And that's why kicking a kid out of a program is the worst thing you can do, because it trashes their self-esteem. When they don't feel like they belong and that somebody loves them, they have a hard time loving themselves. And once they discover the value of who they are, they become self-actualized. Now, this is his theory with the 5 steps. They've done some revamping of step 5, and now you can find 6 steps. Either way, the goal is to move up this pyramid, right? And I don't know a single kid who goes to get in a gang to get in trouble. But I know a lot of kids that are in gangs because of Maslow. They can get their basic needs met because they can get money. They feel safe because someone's got their back. They belong. That gives them worth. And the gang says, hey, you know what you'd be really good at? And then they get them to do that for the gang. And so this idea of being able to provide these for our kids, if a kid is hungry, he's not going to be interested in math. Okay. And so one of the most important things, the powerful things, a lot of the reason 21st century funds came out in the late 90s was because the FBI did a study that found that middle school kids between the hours of 3 and 6 o'clock, right? So we're talking about studies in 20 years ago. Between 3 and 6 o'clock, a middle school kid had a 300% greater chance of either being the victim of a crime or committing one. And so they put money into after school because we needed to have a place for our kids to be safe, to feel like they belong, to find their value, and be able to use those gifts for their community. Okay. And that's what after school does. The other guy is Kohlberg. And if you don't know Kohlberg, I'm going to give you Gorky's abridged version of what he says. But he's got 3 levels. The first one, I'm worried about me, then us, then them. And then there's 6 stages, 2 to each level. So let's look at these real quickly. You see the sledgehammer? Okay. So the first way we decide right from wrong is if it feels good, it's right. If it hurts me, it's wrong. Now, some people that to this day, that's how they decide what's right and wrong. Hasn't make me feel. Feels good, it's right. Hurts me, wrong. That's how they decide it. When you have a kid say, what are you going to give me? They're working this exchange, right? This ping, 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 right? This little thing going back and forth. If I'm going to do something I might not like, but I still get something, what are you going to give me? When I have that conversation with you, I just moved up a level of morality, because I'm going to do stuff that I don't necessarily like in order to get the reward at the end of it. Then we move to this concept of an us. Those first 2 stages are in that level of it's all about me, right? Then I move into this concept of us, where I'm like, okay, I begin to care what a handful of people think about me. If I say, oh, I can't do that, my mom will get mad. I just moved up a level of morality, because I'm going to change my behavior based on what my parents think, or my friends think, or my boss thinks. When I modify my behavior because there's a group of us that I care, I've moved up a level. The next level then is law and order. And this is where there's rules and you follow the rules. Okay. Now I know there are stop signs in Alaska in the middle of nowhere, and you can see for miles, there's nobody coming, and you still stop because it says to stop. Whether somebody's watching you or not, you do it because it's the right thing to do. Okay. So most of our population, about 85% of our population, doesn't get past stage 4. Now, y'all on this call, you're going to be in 5 and 6, because there's this group of individuals in our culture that will do what they call a social contract. Now, the reason I got a cupcake there, imagine pre-COVID, 20 kids in the kindergarten class. Mom is baking cupcakes because one of them has a birthday, and she brings in the cupcakes, and it's got the icing, and it's in the little Tupperware, and 20 cupcakes, 20 kids. And today they have a new student. And it's a kid in the class who says, that's all right. The new kid can have mine. When I give up what I might myself want, because there's a greater need in a society of people that I don't even know all of them very well. Now I've moved into a place of a social contract. And the last one, the easiest thing for me to do, let me give you people. Okay, Gandhi, Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., Mother Teresa, people who said if the world would just do this one thing, if they would have this principled conscience, if they would live in peace, if they would take care of their sick and injured, if they would be colorblind in the way that they have, interactions with individuals, they give their entire being to it, and it generally costs them their lives. And sometimes literally, but also just economically and all of that. They just pour their whole being if the world would just embrace this principle. Okay. And the goal then is to move up these steps. So that's Kohlberg. The last guy I want to talk about, and this is where you need your paper and pencil. Okay. So get your paper and your pencil. Okay. Get it out, because now you're going to do this. One of my favorite psychological guys that talk about development, how do we decide what is right and wrong, and how do we do that, is a guy named Alfred Adler. Now you'll be like, I don't know if I know him. After I do this with you, you'll be like, oh, that's that guy. Okay. Because I like Adler. There's some things about him that are very cool. And I had this experience years ago in a class that I had in college. And it really made me realize, where does my compass come from? Where do I decide this? Okay. So I want you to finish these sentences. I'm going to give them to you. I'm going to give you a quick minute to write it down so that you know what it is. And then we're going to have a discussion. You guys ready? Okay. So here's the first statement. It's an open-ended statement. The nature of man is ... When somebody says, what's the basic nature of mankind? What do you think? When you think about mankind, what's the basic nature? Are they positive? Are they negative? Are they moral? Are they immoral? When you think about mankind, are they basically good? What is the thought that comes to your head? The nature of man is what? All right, here comes the next one. What is truth? If I tell you it's true, what does that mean? What is truth? Where does it come from? How do you know it when you see it? Okay, next one. When I say mom or motherhood, when I talk about what a mother is, what is that? Okay, we got to be equitable. When I say dad, when I say fatherhood, what's it mean to be a father? And two more. Here we go. When I ask you, who are you? Who are you? What do you identify with? What are the things that make you you? If I ask you who you are, somebody asks me, I start with, well, I'm a teacher, because that's who I am to the very core of my being. You hang out with me, I'm going to teach you something, okay? Because that's what I do, right? But who are you? What do you identify with? And then the last one, how do you know when you get it right? How do you know when you're successful? What do you see? What do you hear? How do you know that you've done it well? Okay, so make sure you have an answer for that. And later on, you're not going to have time during this session because we're pretty crunched for time, but you're going to have to try to connect these two things. Okay, so here's what I want you to do now. Now that you've got a statement and you've completed these: nature of man, truth is, mother, father, what I identify, and how I feel, or how do I know I'm successful? All right, got those answers? Okay, so now what I want you to do is I want you to think of your earliest childhood recollection, the earliest memory you have. Now, I'm going to tell you what my earliest childhood memory is, okay? My earliest childhood memory, I'm about 2.5 years old. I have a hold of my father's hand. Now, my father was military, and we were coming out of a military hospital. And the floor was these black and white checkered squares. the 12-inch squares, right? Now, on the way in, my eyesight was so bad as a kid. Normal eyesight is 20/20. My eyesight was 2950. So without glasses, legally blind. Okay. Just so you know. And so it was the day I was coming out of the hospital with my first pair of glasses on the military hospital. I have my dad by the hand. So 2.5, I got my new glasses and I am stepping on the black squares. And my dad has a hold of me. He looks down, he goes, Gale, my dad's 6'2", right? Big guy. He was a big guy. He goes, what are you doing? And I go, well, the black and white checkers. The floor on the way in, because I couldn't see, the floor was gray. I couldn't differentiate the black and white checkers. And on the way out, I remember the first time I had my glasses on where I saw life differently. Okay. And my dad's like, what do you, and so I have this very vivid memory of putting those glasses on for the first time and being able to see the world more clearly. That's my earliest childhood recollection. So whatever that is, whatever recollection you have, and you might have to go, but some of us, this is a longer journey than others. Okay. I'm 63. So trying to remember the earliest thing that happened to me, that might be harder than if you're like, 18. So what is your earliest childhood memory? The earliest way that you can go back in your head. And I want you to consider these things when you're thinking about that memory. Okay. Who are you with? Who was in that memory? For me, it was my father. And when he passed a few years ago, it was a huge loss in my life because I adored my father. And he taught me how to do so many things. And every time I fix something or I solve something or I build something, I'm like, thanks, Dad. Because all of those things that make me me came from him. Okay. So who were you with? Who's that earliest childhood memory? Second thing I want you to consider is what were you feeling emotionally? For me, it was that joy of, hey, I can see. That's great. What was the emotion that was tied to that memory? What did you feel? Okay. And maybe there was multiple feelings going on. All right. Were you active or passive? Was it something that you did or something being done to you? Okay. So you want to make sure that you check on that. And then the last part of it is, once you've done that, once you've gone to that earliest childhood memory, you need to take the time to go back to the stuff that you answered on that previous screen. And then I want you to see if you have any connections between that earliest recollection and how you see the world today and what you value in the world today. When I did this and I went back and I looked at what I had written for all of those different things, it had everything to do with what I could see and not see, what was clear and what was unclear. And all of it tied back to that day that I got my sight for the first time. So I want you to go on this journey, and it might take you a little bit to get from one place to another. But this is what Adler believed. He believed that those earliest childhood things that happened to us set us up for a lifetime of deciding what we felt was right and wrong, what we valued and didn't value, and how we saw what was worth. Okay. So that's one that I want you to do. The other reason you might know Alfred is you might have heard about birth order. If you've done anything with birth order, first child, middle child, last child, only child, if you didn't, then you've been quoting Adler. Okay. If you talk about any of that. And so one of the things about Adler is he had this idea that depending on where you came in to your family, everybody goes, well, is it nature or is it nurture? And the answer is yes. It is. It's both those things. And his was a huge thing on where you were in the role of your family. And so when you look at these questions, considering your birth order, the first one is, would you think you would be different if you were born in a different place in your family? If instead of the baby of the family, you were the firstborn, or instead of being an only child, there was another sibling, would that have changed where you were at? Do you think it would have changed for you if your gender was different? Would that change culturally or in your family? There's certain cultures that treat certain genders in a very obvious different way. And would that change for you? And then the last one is, do you see any connections between some of these characteristics and the way you behave today in your life and in relationships with not just the family you were born into, but the family you have chosen? And so if there's some things that you see in that. So those are the two kind of cool activities I want you to consider over the next few days, thinking about that, kind of looking at that. You know, how did you get your moral compass? Where did it come from? Did it come from your faith? Did it come from some of the developmental things that happened in your family? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it both? Okay. The last couple of things I want to talk about. I read a book in my late 20s by a guy named M. Scott Peck. Now, those of you that are a little older like me, you might remember the first book he wrote, which was an international hit, was called The Road Less Traveled. And he actually introduces 4 life skills in that road, you know, to how do you live your life more productive and healthy and happy and all of that. But the book that I really had changed me the most was this one, The People of the Lie, The Hope for Healing Human Evil. And he delineates between individuals that have a psychosis and those that are just regular people that end up doing really, really bad things to others. Consider the guards in the Holocaust. Consider some of the things that were done to indigenous people in many of the lands that are the United States. You know, people that, you know, well, they're a good person, but they did these things that were very, very bad. And so he said the hope to heal that is you have to recognize that individuals that are capable of harming others practice 2 strategies. Okay, the first is they lie, hence the name of the book. They lie so often, they've come to believe it to be the truth. And they have said it again and again and again, and focused on that and encouraged that. And then the second thing they've done is they've scapegoated. They've blamed everybody and everything else, and they do not take responsibility for the actions. It was, well, that was this or that was that. And what he says is if you'll lie and you won't take responsibility, you put yourself in danger of being somebody that can do really bad things to others. And so what he encourages in the book is for us to speak the truth, to honor the truth, to share the truth, and to be able to say, this is my responsibility. This is where I take this on. Okay. And to be not just responsible for our actions, but for our influence. You know, and that's the hardest thing about being an educator, about being a teacher, is that it's not just what I do, it's what I teach others to do. And so to be focused on the truth and to take responsibility. And so in my classroom, we used to have a whole list of rules. I put my rules down to 2. We're going to tell the truth. We're going to take responsibility. You want to be in a relationship with me? We're going to tell the truth. We're going to speak from a responsible place. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, why is this so important? If you're going to be a leader, people are going to follow you. The kids that you serve are going to follow you. Some of the most important examples or lessons you teach, you're not even going to know you taught them. Okay. How you interact with them, the way that you treat them, the way that you treat each other. Kids miss nothing. They know when you're wearing new shoes, you have on a new haircut, a new clothes. They know what car you drive. They know the ringtones on your phone. They know who's calling. They know what fast food restaurant you go to. They know what you order when you go there. And they know which other employees you do and do not get along with. Guys, they are watching us like a hawk. And some of the most important lessons we teach, we didn't even know we taught them. Okay. And here's what's interesting. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they did some experiments that they will no longer do. In fact, they got this cool article, 28 experiments they'll no longer do because they actually cause people psychological harm. Okay. So they don't do them anymore. But there's some interesting data that comes from these. Okay. The first one is the Ash Conformity Experiment. And this was done in the 1950s. Now, what Solomon Ash did is he took 7 guys, put them in a room and said, okay, you guys, I'm going to show you some lines. First 2 times, give me the correct answer. On the 3rd time, give me the obviously wrong answer. And the guy that's number 8, we're going to see if he does it, if he answers the same answer. Now, by the way, all of these experiments were done on men because they didn't think women would be different than men back then. And now we know, and that's why even like with medical things, like for the longest time, heart attacks were all the medicine, all the stuff was done, but how men's bodies respond. And we know now that women's bodies don't respond the same way. And now we've actually done stuff for both genders and found information based on that. But back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was all just guys. Okay. So that's one of the first things you need to understand. So they had these guys and they put them in a room. There was like 50 of them. And there were guys from all kinds of different walks of life, et cetera, et cetera. And they put them there and they said, okay, now answer you first 7, answer 2 times correctly, answer the 3rd one wrong. And this is what's interesting. 74% of them answered obviously the wrong answer because everybody else said that was the answer. Only 20% of the population said, oh, wait a second, I'm sorry, guys, but that's obviously wrong. How are you saying that's right? Only 26% stood up. 74% conformed. And it was obviously a wrong answer, but they said, no, that's the right answer. Okay, here, this one really blew me away. If you've ever read about the Milgram shock experiment, what they did is they put an actor on the other side of this glass partition, and he was wired up, and his job was to answer questions incorrectly. And the person they were experimenting on was on the other side of that glass with the experimenter sitting behind him. Okay, and this person behind was telling that person, you have to do this. Okay, and there were several prompts that they did. The job was, if I was the one that being the experiment, I would look at this guy across the glass, he would be asked a question, and when he answered the question incorrectly, my job was to issue him a shock. And there was a set of flipper switches. And when I flipped the switch, there was a light in the other room, and that actor pretended like he was being shocked. Nobody got shocked in this experiment, but it looked like they did. Okay? This will really blow you away. Everybody shocked the person on the other side of the screen at least once. At least once. Only 12% walked away. Then another 10%. But 66% stayed and shocked that individual to the point that it would have been lethal. Now that blows me away. And so do we do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, even when we're being put in a position where we feel like they're going to make us do this? Can we stand up and do the right thing because it's the right thing to do? The last one, 1970s, Zimbardo took the basement of his Stanford building and he turned it into a prison. He literally gave some guys the role as prisoners, some guys the roles as guards. And he said, you guys need to play this out. You can't be mean. You can't hurt them physically, but you need to stay in control. And what happened in just a couple of days that got so bad, Zimbardo's girlfriend was like, dude, stop this. In a few days, they became sadistic. The guards became sadistic and the prisoners were depressed. And they had to shut the thing down because when absolute power corrupts absolutely, people start doing very mean things to each other. And psychologically, it became very destructive. So here's my question for you. Looking at these experiments, there's a group of individuals that would be the right choosers. 26% in the Ash theory said, hey, guys, that's not right. It's obviously the wrong answer. With Milgram, they were persuaded with a series of prompts. The first one was, please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It's absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. And what we need to know is we always have a choice. We always have a choice to stand up for what is right and good and honest and kind. And we need to be a part of those individuals that are willing to do that. So in a room where nobody sees and nobody knows, can you still do the right thing? Simply because it's the right thing to do. Without the acknowledgement, without the honors of all of that, can we be the kind of people that are civil and gracious and caring? So how do we teach our kids this? I'm going to give you some resources. You give them dilemmas. This is probably one of the most common dilemmas you'll ever hear. It's written by a guy named Heinz. He's got a wife that's sick, and the doctor in the city has a cure, but he wants too much money for it, and the guy can't afford it. And so he steals the stuff to save his wife's life. And the question is, should he have done it? Who was right? Who was wrong? And I'm going to give you a handout that has 28 of these scenarios. So you can change it up. You can do some really cool cultural things with that. It's the idea of putting your kids in positions to think about this before they actually come into a similar situation in the real life time. And it's an opportunity to dialogue about what what constitutes a good choice and a right choice and a civil choice. And so we'll give you some of that information, and getting your kids to have the opportunity to do that. Okay. The other stuff I'm going to give you is I'm going to give you some information about a book written by a woman named Michelle Borba. Dr. Borba is an internationally known speaker that talks about the fact that bullying and violence in our schools, she believes, is because our children don't know how to be empathetic. They lack empathy. And so her whole book is 9 habits, 9 steps of being empathetic. It's written toward parents, but guys, we're in loco parentis, which means Latin means in place of the parent. Sometimes we spend more time with these kids in their waking hours than their parents do. Okay. And so the idea that what you do is one step away from parenting them. And so this book is totally cool because each chapter talks about each of the habits and then gives you activities that you could do that would help to encourage those things. Okay. Interesting thing, out of the 9, 3 of them have to do with morality. They have to have a moral identity. They have to know what is right and wrong. They have to be able to have moral imagination, which means that if the right thing could happen, what would it look like? Okay. How would I see that? And then the last part of that is they have to have moral courage, the ability to stand up and to say, you know what, this is what's right. And this is what we need to do. Okay. So great book. I'm going to give you some discussion things on it. If you have a chance to get a hold of it, I'm going to tell you, it's really, really good about teaching your kids to be more empathetic. Okay. And in our society, gosh, we love our gangsters. And when our heroes screw up, you can do good. And then all of a sudden you make a mistake and like everybody, that's it. Okay. You're done. And it's like the opposite. The guys can be terrible their whole lives, but then they do something really good. And then all of a sudden they're great, and it's really sad that that can be keyed on just one thing, one way or the other. And so what we need to do is make sure that, that we celebrate those that are really doing well. Now, you do need to know you're going to make mistakes. I wish that all of us could do things without that. But the bottom line is we're going to have a situation where we're going to make a mistake. All right. And so I love this quote by Anthony Robbins. This is what he said, Tony Robbins. He said, when you fail, you ponder. And when you succeed, you party. And that's why greatness can only come from failing, because it's the only time that we look at it and say, what could I do differently? How could I change that? So I want you to consider what you think about when you think about failure. And I need you to change your mind about that word, because making mistakes is the part of being human. Okay. It's what we do. And there's 2 thoughts you can have here that might help with that. One is that failure is basically not a problem. It is a teacher. It basically tells you don't do that again. Okay. And fix that. Or you can talk about the fact that there really isn't failure. There's only outcomes. There's only, and if you don't like the outcome, you need to do something differently. If you don't like the story, tell yourself a different story, tell yourself a different ending. If we keep telling ourselves the same story, we end up having the same thing. And it's until we tell ourselves something different and we change the outcomes of that. Okay. One of my favorite quotes by Michael Jordan is this one. Michael said that I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I was trusted to take the game-winning shot, and I missed. I failed over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. Every time they passed Michael the ball, he took the shot. And he knew there was a possibility he might miss, but he still took the shot. And so I want you to think about that. So what happens when we screw up? A lot of us feel guilty. And my recommendation to you is don't worry about being guilty, because all guilt does is make you run and hide and try to run away from the situation. When you make a mistake, and you will, what you want to feel is sorrow. You want to look at it and go, okay, so I'm sorry for this. How do I remedy it? How do I make it better? How do I fix what's broken? And so when we mess up, let's move toward that place of sorrow. Let's reach out. Let's work at making sure that we don't make those kinds of mistakes again, and that we continue building those relationships, because there's no significant learning in the absence of a significant relationship. And by the way, if you don't love kids, get another job, because they know. And so, yeah, when we mess up, reach out. Okay. And a lot of that has to do with this last word about forgiving. So since I started with Frozen 2, I'm going to move toward the end here. Let it go. Let it go. Okay. The thing about forgiveness, the thing about when we mess up, that we need to forgive and forgive ourselves as well as forgive those that have had problems with us. One, forgiveness keeps us from getting bitter. And two, it helps us deal with our frustration with that. And many times forgiveness is actually an act on your own behalf. It's great for those that we forgive, but it's also good for us to let that go, to be able to move forward, recognize that mistakes are a part of life, and that we do want to do it as right and good and kind and gracious. So Margaret Mead said this: never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And the last binging I did was Harry Potter. I don't know if there's any Potterheads out there, but there you go. I was watching the Chamber of Secrets, and there's this poignant point where Harry realizes he's connected to Voldemort, and he's afraid because Voldemort has turned out to be this terrible, evil person, right? He's afraid that he's going to turn out that way too. And the conversation he has with Dumbledore says, it's not our abilities that show what we truly are. It's our choices. Can you choose to do the right thing? So here's my personal information if you want to stay in touch with me. I think it's time for us to open up for questions. Look at me, I'm right on time. Who knew? But I think it's a chance for you guys to either share some things or ask some questions or whatever. So I'm going to turn it back over to Thomas, and then again, you'll get the PDF of my PowerPoint and all of the handouts that go with it. And they're going to send that to you through your guys' information. And so I'm going to just hang out and see what people have to say.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Gale Gorke. If folks have questions, you're welcome to put it in the chat box. You're also welcome, if you'd like to instead, just send me a message directly as well. You're welcome to do that. We did have one question on the last part that you were sharing there about this notion of like when we screw up and we feel guilty or that, and how do you move towards that place? Like some of our natural reactions is, I feel guilty, I want to run away from the problem instead of confronting it. Do you have any tips or strategies that we may face where when we know we've screwed up on a relationship or in our actions and programs, how do we move from that place of feeling guilty to get ourselves to playing like, okay, how do I resolve this? How do I own the fact that I screwed up?
Yeah. The problem with feelings is they come 80,000 times faster than our thoughts. Okay. The limbic part of the brain operates 80,000 times faster than the thoughts. And so emotions come to us like that, right? And then people say, why do you feel that way? And you say, I don't know. And it's because your thoughts haven't caught up yet and you don't know. So one of the things is we have those reflex feelings, those things that are just, that moment. And so recognizing that that's there. So here's the cool thing about the way your brain functions. There's a great book called Hardwiring for Happiness by a guy named Hansen. And he talks about the brain being basically designed to be negative. It's looking for the next problem. It doesn't celebrate when it has successes. And some of the fears you've had from a kid last you a lifetime. And in order to change that, you have to heal. So HEAL, you have to have a better experience. You have to enrich that experience. You have to absorb it. And then you have to link it to something positive. And the thing about that last step, that linking it to something positive and changing that thought process, it requires you to keep both the negative and the positive in your head at the same time, to not let the negative hijack the positive, and to retrain your brain to focus on the more positive choice, which in this case would be the difference between feeling guilty and feeling sorrow. Sorrow is a more positive choice because it encourages us to reach out. So first of all, it's something you have to practice. Now, the beauty about memory is it's dynamic. We have those flashbulb moments that we remember for a lifetime, but most memories are built step by step by step by step. So how do you go from having that more guilty feeling to a more sorrowful feeling? Every time it happens, the guilt's going to come. You got to say, okay, now I don't want to feel guilty. I want to feel sorrowful. And you got to practice that shift. And the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it, to the point that then your instinct will not be to feel guilty. It will be to feel sorrow and to reach out. But it might take, time. And because emotions come so much faster than our thoughts, we have to allow ourselves to have those emotions, work through them, try to get our thought patterns to change. Can they be changed? Absolutely. Will it take time? Oh, yeah. And it might take a lifetime. It might be something that it might take you forever to fix. But the fact that you want to fix it and there's a desire for that, I think in time you can. So yeah, it's a hard thing, but it's a choice. It's a conscious choice, and you can make a better choice for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, Dr. Gallo, about this notion of like, these are all skills that we're practicing and learning, all these emotional skills, and we as adults still need to practice and learn them too. I think at the beginning, I wrote down a quote that says, after school is a place where knowledge becomes practice. And I think that is very true, where it's like, we know about feelings, but how do we get a chance in out of school time to really practice and give kids the opportunity to practice those skills?
We have the most valuable piece. We have time with them. Time is 24 hours a day. Once we spend it, it's gone forever. Who you spend your time with, where you spend your time, most significant choices you make after school beyond anything else is time. It's opportunity. And we really have a gift in that.
Right. And we had a chat come in from Martha. She was asked, is there a way to encourage our kids in the most simplest way when we run out of ideas? Like, how do we keep that encouragement and those kind of simple kind of daily reminders where it feels like, man, I don't know what else I can do to keep encouraging that when things just feel difficult and challenging?
I think the concept of motivation right now is one that all of us are struggling with. Our kids aren't motivated. They're flat in their affect. There's been a regression in the way that they respond. Our elementary kids are acting like preschoolers, our middle school kids are acting like elementary, and all our high school kids have become hormonal again. It's just been this thing because of COVID. And I think the idea about motivation and motivating ourselves, probably the best book I read on motivation is a book called Drive by a guy named Daniel Pink. And he says the number one drive is biology. So when we're tired, we sleep. When we're hungry, we eat. That's why pizza parties work, because that will drive us to do things. The second kind of drive would be extrinsic motivation, rewards and punishments. And what he says in the book is they eventually fail. Eventually, those things don't work anymore. And so the most powerful drive next to biology would be intrinsic motivation. How do we get ourselves to be motivated to make those conscious choices? And he says intrinsic motivation, the best part about the book is he gives us a definition of intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is inside of you. I wish there was a switch or a knob that I could adjust, right? Oh, good. Now you feel better. But it's not. It has to come from inside. And the beauty of that is he gives us a definition that as an educator, I may not be able to intrinsically motivate you, but I can create an environment where you will want to motivate yourself. So an environment that encourages kids to be motivated, all right, has three parts. First, I have to be able to have a choice and have control. All right. Especially the older the kids go. Your middle school kids should be designing, implementing, and evaluating their programs, because choice and control is key. Because the minute I have a choice, that moves it inside of me. The second piece that it has is you have to create and learn. You have to walk away from whatever the activity that was with skills. You have to be able to say, look what I did, or look what I can do. Because once I have skills, once I can create and learn, again, those are mine, they're in me, and I can use them whenever I want to. And then the third piece of it, I have to understand the benefit. I understand how it enhances my life and it enhances the lives of others. So if I want to be motivated, if I want to have those little things that are going to make a difference, choice and control, create and learn, and understand the benefit. And if I can create an environment where you feel that way about things, you will make better choices based on your own input. So that's what I would do.
Thank you. I am seeing, I have another chat here. One of the questions that was posed in the chat box is, how do we reconcile the difference between this idea of kind of ethics or values that are being taught in school and out of school time, and how do we recognize and acknowledge where at times some of those values do not actually meet what might be the cultural norm, the cultural values and expectations, and how as we as after school professionals can reflect the cultures, the norms and values of the communities and the lives of our students and our staff, and recognize.
Yeah. Well, think about the information that our kids are being bombarded with. You know, when I was going to do a report, there were like 3 encyclopedias in the library, you know, and we had a hard time finding 5 references. Our kids Google something, they get 65,000 things. So there has to be this filter. And part of that filter is the difference between right and wrong, good and bad. And so, and sometimes, you know, like there's certain cultures I've worked with. There's a school that I taught at for a long time, and what happened outside of the school facility was very different than what happened inside of the school facility. There were different rules and different expectations, and you know, and so there's a couple of things. One, we need to teach our kids there's a time and a place for everything. And so, yeah, you want to talk to your friends that way, you want to do that on your own time, that's fine, but that doesn't happen here. There's a time and a place for everything. And that's a universal truth that we all need to learn. You know, we behave one way at work, we behave another way with our family, we behave one way at a thing. We have this way that we need to be able to understand those cultural things might change. Okay, so that's one of the first things. The second thing is, anytime we can bring in what is culturally appropriate and what is appropriate at the school where they overlap, that's that universal truth piece, where we can say, okay, yeah, but this is how it works here and here. And so this is something we need to know. So that would be a second part to that because you want to be able to do that. After school actually can literally create its own culture. It can't be 3.5 more hours of what they did during the regular day. If it didn't work during a regular day, 3.5 more hours of it in the after school is not going to work either. And any of us that have worked in after school realize it has to look different. It has to sound different. Doesn't mean we can't have the same content. Doesn't mean we can't encourage them to do well in school, help them with their homework, all of that. But there is a culture that you can create. You're a member of this group. These are the norms we have. These are the way we behave. This is how we talk to each other. This is the way we treat each other. All of those things can be established for your after school program. You know, you did something at the very beginning of this session. You sent the norms for the conference. Yeah, a little slide, has 6 things. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to behave. You set those norms up. And I think part of our dilemma is we don't take the time to do that for our kids sometimes. And so if you do take the time to set the norms and say, look, I don't care what you're doing over here. What we're doing right here is this, and this is what our expectations are. This is how we're going to behave. And I think that's a really powerful tool because our kids many times are amoral about stuff. Remember, we talked about that. Sometimes they know and sometimes they don't. Now, when they know and they choose the wrong, that's a whole nother set. But sometimes they just don't understand what's expected of them. And I think the clearer we are about what those expectations are will help them behave better, practice better, and that culture then can be created, what is appropriate. The only thing I can liken what you guys do in Alaska to is I've had a lot of experience with Calgary, Canada. And they have discovered that they were very cruel to their Indigenous people as well. And they take the time to acknowledge that and honor that with everything that happens. And they treat it so sacredly. That's why I wanted to use that word about Alaska being sacred. It is this. And so the modeling of that, the repetition of that, the sharing of that. And I noticed even in the chat box at the beginning, even people changed. There were some people, I'm so-and-so from such and such. Well, after you made your comment about that and we acknowledged that, all of a sudden, even in the chat box, people were acknowledging that they were grateful for the people that had lived before them in that province or in that county or whatever. And so I think, yeah, modeling is key. You know, they don't go where we don't lead. So, yeah.
I don't see any other chats coming in. So I just want to, again, Dr. Gale, so much for joining us. If everyone please would give a big virtual round of applause.
Round of applause.
Uh,
Hey, can I teach him to moonwalk? Can I teach him to moonwalk? You gotta channel your inner Michael Jackson. Okay. Beat it. It's okay. Put your arm like this. Put your arm like this, right? Now put your fingers at your elbow. Put your fingers at your elbow. Walk your fingers. And then as they're walking, pull your arm backwards. Come on. Here, you can do it from the other arm too. Walk your fingers at the elbow and then just slide your arm backwards and you can moonwalk. Everybody can moonwalk. There you go. All right. I had to give you a gift. What can I say?
Well, on that note, thank you again, Dr. for joining us. Thank you everyone for joining us as well. We have a break coming up. So our next sessions, so that is the 4 breakout sessions, they will start at 10:30. So get yourself up, get your body moving and grooving, do some stretches, get outside if you can, take some breaths of fresh air. I know here in Anchorage it is in the single digits, so it is
make your bladder gladder. Yeah.
Yes, and do all your bio needs you need. We will see you back in workshop rooms at 10:30. Again, check out the forum and other discussion opportunities. Thank you all. We'll see you soon.